Chapter 35, On the Run. Mr. Bixley has Angus Fenn's box in there, I say. I think of this as a locksmith's. Fisher's eyes are wide with adventure. Wait, how do you know it's Angus Fenn's box? Well, I have a picture of it in Miss Amanda's photo album. The box has letters AF on it. Fisher peeks in the window and slides back to the ground. Yup, and Bixley needs an expert to open it because he doesn't have the key because it's not his box. My shirt is stuck to me with sweat. My hair is like a wool blanket on my neck, and sections of it are plastered to my damp face. Despite the cloud cover that has blocked the sun, it's still sweltering hot and off the charts humid. We have to get that box before the locksmith opens it and Mr. Bixley takes the Angus Fenn's fortune, I say. Well, I can cause a distraction, Fisher suggests. Maybe we should call the police. Well, what will they do? You have to prove that he stole the box. Well, I've got a photo of the box, but that doesn't prove anything, only that it was at a circus and that it's an old box. The air is getting darker directly in front of my face. I look up at the sky, and it has that soupy storm look with clouds in varying shades of gray to darker gray to nearly black, mixing together like a poison brew. I know this sort of sky all too well. I know it better than most people. And just as I suspected, the wind has been quiet because it was up to something. June is peak tornado season in Nebraska. Looks like a big one, Fisher says, referring to the clouds. Yeah, I hope it's only bluffing, but I think I know better. I rest my hand on the warm metal doorknob and peek through the bottom corner of the window again. The locksmith is talking to Mr. Bixley, and the box is still sitting on the backroom counter. It seems like the locksmith hasn't found the right tool yet. I'm going to go in there, I whisper, glancing at Fisher. Well, I'll go around the front and distract him, he says, and then you can sneak in and take the box. A smile breaks through at the corner of his mouth. I make a quick promise to myself to watch his next baseball game and to stay the whole time, no matter what. Thank you, I whisper. He stands up and takes off running around the front of the building. I watch through the bottom corner of the window. Fisher enters the shop's front doors. Mr. Bixley turns when the bell above the door jingles. I've got a problem, Fisher says super loud. The locksmith sets down his tool. Fisher, what are you doing here? Mr. Bixley sounds both surprised and annoyed. I've got this lock I can't open, Fisher almost yells. Mr. Bixley turns all the way to face Fisher. Both Mr. Bixley and the locksmith have their back to Angus Fenn's box. I try turning the doorknob to sneak in there, but it's locked. I stand upright and wave frantically at Fisher through the window, and I point at the door and shrug. Fisher wrinkles his face at me and keeps talking very loudly. I can't open it because it's not my box. Someone else has the key. What would you suggest? Well, I can't help you open something that doesn't belong to you, says the locksmith. Fisher gives Mr. Bixley a wicked look, and with Fisher's wild hair and his excellent smirk, he's good at it. He leans over the customer counter and points at the box in the back. Well then, he says to the locksmith, you can't open that. The locksmith turns around to look at the box, and he sees me peering in through the window. He comes over to the door and opens it. Can I help you? Without pausing to think, I slip under his arm and through the open door. Hey, says the locksmith. Mr. Bixley is blustering like the wind at Fisher, who has opened a swinging half door at the end of the customer counter. Over here, Lex, Fisher calls. I run to the work table and grab hold of the metal box, but it's heavier than I expected. I drop Miss Amanda's albums on the table, I heft the box down, and I slide it across the tile floor to Fisher's waiting hands. He catches it. Don't take my tools, says the locksmith. We won't. I grab the photo albums and run after Fisher in the box, through the swinging half door, past Mr. Bixley, who isn't nearly as fast as we are, and out the front doors of the shop. We're 2 doors down the street when we hear Mr. Bixley's voice explode out of the shop doors. He'll be after us in his car as soon as he can get to it. I call to Fisher as we run down the sidewalk. This way! I point to an alley between the 2 stores. I don't even notice what the stores are anymore. I only know we have to get to a bus stop before Mr. Bixley gets into his car. The The sky is even darker now, and the air has turned an eerie hint of green. "Fisher!" I point at the sky. Fisher nods. He knows it, too. A twister is coming. We tear out of the alley onto another street and turn left toward the traffic light. We angle across the street and cut through the grass. There's a bus stop sign at the next corner, and Fisher and I bolt straight for it. The buses run regularly through this city, but that doesn't mean one will arrive just when we need it. We might be running to the next stop and the next one, moving in little segments closer to the zoo, hoping for luck with the bus's schedule. My feet barely touch the ground anymore. Maybe it's all the running I've been doing lately, and I'm starting to get used to it. And maybe it's the exhilaration of finding the metal box with AF stamped on top. And maybe it's that I feel more powerful without the wind speaking to me. We reach the bus stop, and Fisher sets the box in the grass at his feet. I can tell he's trying to be careful with it, but it almost tumbles out of his hands. "What do you think it is in that?" he gasps out between breaths. I don't know. Miss Amanda just said it's what's left of Angus Fenn's fortune. I look up and down the street for signs of an approaching bus. The air is very still. If a bus doesn't come soon, Mr. Bixley will be the least of our worries. We'll have to find shelter from the storm out there, away from the zoo. Maybe we should head to the next... Suddenly, Mr. Bixley's bright blue car appears at the corner and he spots us. He's waiting for a break in the traffic so he can turn left, and then he'll catch up to us. "Fisher!" "Yeah, I see him." Fisher picks up the box and we start running. Just then, I see the top of the city bus towering above the cars on the road. It's driving toward us on the other side of the street, away from the zoo. If we can get across the street and wave down the bus, then maybe it will stop for us. I grab Fisher's arm and I point across the street. We're watching for a way through the traffic when the blue car pulls up to the curb. "Run!" I yell to Fisher. But Mr. Bixley rolls down the passenger window and says, "This phone call is for the two of you." And he holds his cell phone out facing us. He has a call in progress and the phone is on speaker. "Fisher and Lexington," Mrs. Lee's voice sails out of the phone. "One of Isabel's sales clerks called to say he lost track of the two of you downtown. What are you thinking? There's a storm coming." "You both need to get into Mr. Bixley's car right now," says Mr. Lee's stern voice. "He's going to bring you home. Do you understand?" Fisher and I glance at each other, and I grab onto Angus Fenn's box with my free hand. After all I've done to find the Fenn fortune, we have to put it right back in the car with Mr. Bixley? "Please come home with Frank, Lex," says Roger's voice. I picture him huddled around a phone with the Lees. "It's going to be okay." How could he possibly know that? I don't think he knows that the box that he found inside the old passenger car has a fortune in it, or that Fisher and I have it right now. "Lex?" He sounds nervous. "Yes?" I yell so I don't have to get close to Mr. Bixley. "You need to outrun this storm. That's more important than anything else right now, okay?" I bite my lip. Roger's right, and he's worried about me. It's for this reason only that I decide to get into Mr. Bixley's car. Not because Mr. Bixley points at us and then points at the seats inside the car as though he's commanding us to get in and sit. A burning, pinching sensation at the corner of my eyes signals the tears I don't want to fall. Mr. Bixley puts the phone to his mouth and says, "They're getting in the car. I'll see you in a few minutes." I yank open the rear car door and slide across the seat, clutching Miss Amanda's albums. Fisher stumbles in with the heavy box, gives me a look that says he's not giving up, and shuts the door. Mr. Bixley places his wide arm across the front seat and turns to talk to us. "I'll take that box right up here, Fisher." Fisher scowls. "It's too heavy for me to lift over the seat," he says. "You got us to get in the car, Mr. Bixley. Now drive. Storm's coming." My mouth drops open. I have never heard Fisher talk like that. Mr. Bixley checks his mirrors and talks as he pulls into traffic. "You kids don't seem to understand something." I glare at Mr. Bixley, wishing I had some superpower to make him stay quiet. "It's my job to oversee all aspects of the zoo," Mr. Bixley says. "That's what it means to be general manager." "Does it mean that you get to steal things?" My words tumble out. I don't care that he's the general manager because he's wrong and he should know it. I have responsibilities for all the zoo's resources, Mr. Bixley says calmly. He talks to me like I'm either 5 years old or stupid, and I hate that. And that includes donations to the zoo. Yeah, but this box isn't a donation, I say, and I think you know that, or you wouldn't have towed away Miss Amanda's trailer. Mr. Bixley stops for a minute when I say that. Maybe I have a superpower to make him be quiet after all. Fisher looks at me with raised eyebrows, but gives me a little nod. Well, we'll see what your... Mr. Bixley clears his throat and looks at me in the rearview mirror. We'll see what Roger has to say about all this. Anger boils inside me. He was going to say, your dad, but he stopped himself. I'm sure that's what he was going to say. Mr. Bixley is awkward when he talks about Roger and me because Roger isn't my dad and I'm not Roger's daughter. Years ago, I cried when Roger brought up adoption because it made everything so final, and I didn't want to believe that my family was definitely gone. But now I think my family is gone no matter what, and Roger hasn't asked me about it again. Whenever Mr. Bixley stumbles over his words, it makes me think of that feeling of missing people that you can't remember. And now I'm thinking of Roger framing that photo of us in the train cab. Mr. Bixley shouldn't be the one to make me think of these things. I grit my teeth and refuse to look at the back of Mr. Bixley's head or his rearview mirror anymore. I keep turning pages in the album for Fisher to see, pointing out the young Miss Amanda and finding pictures of Angus Fenn and his wife, Elle. And then I find a page in the photo album that I haven't seen before, but it's still very familiar. It's the image I saw in my head this afternoon when I looked into Naya's eyes at the grasslands. It's Tendai getting a bath. The young woman with the baby strapped to her back sprays Tendai with a hose. Naya showed me this memory of her mother with this woman who looks as comfortable with Tendai as I am with Naya. And the woman isn't Fenn's wife, the beautiful acrobat Elle, but she looks a little bit like her. And all of a sudden, I can't see the pictures very well anymore. It's too dark. Mr. Bixley's car has turned onto the road that curves along the woods outside the zoo fences. We'll reach the zoo parking lot soon, but maybe not soon enough. The greenish haze in the air has given way to darkness beneath heavy storm clouds that refuse to let the daylight through. The wind slams the side of the car and it swerves from the force. Mr. Bixley keeps driving up the hill, but the wind thrashes like how I imagine ocean waves beat against the side of a ship. And I wish that Karana from my book and I were not alike in this one thing, because the wind had it in for her, too. Chapter 36, When Earth and Sky Speak. The tornado warning signs start wailing, and Mr. Bixley drives his car right up over the zoo's front curb, screeching to a halt before he hits the entrance gates. Fisher and I scramble out of the car with Miss Amanda's albums and Angus Fenn's box before Mr. Bixley opens his door. "Get into the cart!" Mr. Bixley hollers over the sirens, walking faster than I've ever seen him move as he points to the lone golf cart parked outside the gift shop. There are often 2 or 3 golf carts parked there, but Isabel and her staff probably left in the larger ones. The remaining one has a front seat and then 2 rear-facing seats. "Hurry!" Mr. Bixley yells, motioning to us with frantic arms, and for the first time ever, I think Mr. Bixley looks worried instead of bossy. Fisher and I slide into the rear seats of the golf cart as Mr. Bixley starts it up. He zips around the Lion Pride statue and down the zoo hill toward Fisher's house. The paved path is empty except for 2 keepers who dart out of a maintenance store and across the grass toward the Wild Kingdom Education Center. The Education Center's basement is the gathering place for storms like this. All guests still in the zoo would have been herded into the big room used for ambassador animal presentations, where rehabilitated animals educate people about their species. I know about the gathering place from Mr. Bixley's zoo procedures training, but I've only had to go down into that room for storms twice in my life. This storm feels bigger than those did. The wind whips my hair around my face and stings my neck and cheeks. I hold tight to the photo albums as leaves and small branches fly at the golf cart from the trees. The air is thick with the stormy smell of soil and wet concrete, and Fisher holds onto the box with one hand and the bar at the rear of the golf cart with the other. I glance at Mr. Bixley in the forward-facing seat as he speeds us toward the Wild Egg Kingdom Education Center. He hasn't even looked for Angus Fenn's box since we left the car at the gates. But I'm sure he'll remember about the fortune once the danger is over. But by then, I can tell Roger the truth about everything. Roger will help me find Eden Fenn and return her father's fortune. Suddenly, I want to see Roger so badly. I think of his strong arms and how safe they are, and I hope I don't have to face this storm without him. It's like the feeling I get when I'm with the elephants, like I belong to something bigger than myself and bigger than the zoo. Even bigger than the wind and everything the wind touches, and I think about Mr. Bixley not being able to say Roger's my dad and why that bothers me now. And then I see him. Roger is coming out of the elephant barn door. Mr. Bixley turns the golf cart sharply onto the path before the African grasslands, and Fisher slides into me as I slam into the sidebar on my seat. Mr. Bixley hasn't seen Roger, and at least I don't think he has, because he keeps driving crazy to outrun the storm. "Roger!" I yell, waving at him frantically. I want him to know that I'm all right, that I'm back at the zoo. Roger holds the metal door open as he walks out, but the enormous gusts snatch it open and slam it against the building. Just as quickly as it bangs open, the door rebounds and hits Roger hard. His face wrenches and he grabs the side of his head as he falls to his knees. My tall, strong Roger. And suddenly I'm seeing Miss Amanda in my imagination as the storm rips her awning poles from the ground and slams them down hard. "Roger!" I scream, smacking Mr. Bixley on the shoulder. "Mr. Bixley, stop!" He stops and I'm off the golf cart, scrambling to Roger before I know how I got there. "I'm all right," Roger says, just loud enough for me to hear over the bellowing storm. But he's not all right. He looks dazed, and he's holding his head and wrinkling up his face like the pain is splitting him open. And then the sky really does split open, and a funnel snakes down from the clouds just beyond the trees behind Fisher's house. I watch it descend lower and lower, from thick to thin, a wide mouth down to a deadly finger that will destroy everything that it touches. I try to help Roger stand, but I'm not strong enough. "Leave the box!" Mr. Bixley is yelling at Fisher. "Leave it! We have to get you all inside!" Mr. Bixley gets on the other side of Roger and helps him to his feet. Fisher grabs the swinging door and we hurry inside the elephant barn. Thomas is by the side wall, throwing buckets of grooming tools and target poles into a closet and securing the door. The elephants have gathered behind the barrier fence inside the barn, their indoor refuge from the weather. They look like they've been here a while. Animals know when a storm is coming. "What happened?" Thomas asks, running over to us. Roger tries to speak, but all he can manage is a soft groan. "The door hit Roger on the head," I shout above the roar of the storm. The approaching wind sounds like a freight train about to burst through the barn wall. "The tornado is here!" Fisher yells. Roger's arm presses down on me until I feel like my legs will buckle. Mr. Bixley has the other side of him, but I'm far too short for this. Thomas rushes to my side and ducks under Roger's arm, supporting him. "Where's the safest place?" Mr. Bixley hollers, as though he's never been in this part of the zoo. "Lex knows," says Thomas, looking at me like I know something more than he does. "Don't you?" With Roger supported by Thomas and Mr. Bixley, I run to the barrier fence. "Over here!" The barrier fence stands beneath the strongest beams of the building, and all the fence poles run deep into the ground. Everything about the barrier fence must support and withstand the processes of elephant training. The fence must support and withstand elephants. Let's see how it does with the tornado. We help Roger sit on the floor by the fence, and he leans against it and holds his head as the tornado roars outside the elephant barn. The building creaks and groans, and suddenly, with the sound of screeching metal and splintering wood, a section of the roof lifts away, and I'm looking straight into the black, swirling storm. "Stop!" I yell in my mind at the wind. "Get back!" The wind pulls on me and sucks my hair straight in front of my face. "You haven't been listening to me," says the wind. "Pay attention now." I grab onto the fence behind us. I grab onto Roger. "Nothing you say helps me," My thoughts are screaming so hard that my head aches. The twister roars louder. Done talking, the wind growls. The elephants trumpet and stamp their large feet. Maybe they're telling the wind to stop too. Everyone is lined up against the fence, but I can hardly see them with the haze of flying debris and my hair blowing in my face. I think they're holding on to the fence as tightly as I am. Something new pulls at my hair. It feels different than the elephant's wildness. It's coming from behind me. I turn and I see the end of a trunk, the two fingers feeling for me. The brown and gold eyes peering at me from the face above belong to Naya. This is what Thomas meant a moment ago. This is something I know from experience that no one else knows. I risk the tornado's suction for a moment as I loosen my grip on the fence and turn myself around. "Lex, hold tight!" shouts Thomas. Roger grabs on to me, his strong arm keeping me from losing my footing against the powerful wind. "Open the gates!" I yell to Thomas and reach for the latch on the nearest training gate. I unhook it and I swing the door open. Naya can reach her trunk through the opening more freely than through the barrier fence when the gates are closed. She wraps her trunk over my shoulder, feels my hair and my head, and she does the same to Roger. Somewhere in the commotion, Mr. Bixley is protesting. Thomas looks me in the eyes, watches Naya wrap her trunk over me and Roger, and nods in understanding. "Open the training gates," he yells to Mr. Bixley. "The small gates and the barrier fence. Open them." "But they can reach through them," yells Mr. Bixley. "Exactly," Thomas answers. "They're dangerous when they're scared," Mr. Bixley protests. "You want to take your chances against that?" Thomas jerks his head at the black twister outside the open roof. "All by yourself?" Hoses fly off their hooks and boxes hurtle into the air as the twister pulls them from inside the barn. The elephants trumpet in alarm. Fisher manages to get a training gate open and Zaire lowers herself to reach her trunk toward him. The twister's suction is fierce, but I hold on to the barrier rails and Naya holds on to me and Roger, all 40,000 muscles in her trunk keeping us safe. Right next to us, Zaire has entwined her trunk under Fisher's arms, and he's gripping her tightly. Thomas must have yanked the other gates open because Asha and Jazz have reached their trunks through, keeping Thomas and Mr. Bixley grounded as the building groans underneath the twister's fury and more of the roof is pulled away. Just then, something appears in the barn doorway, moving into the training area from the hallway on the left. Completely unaffected by the force of the tornado, Miss Amanda walks toward us. We'll pause there.